Well, thank you everyone for joining us for the latest in the MillerKnoll series online. My name is Mark Catchlove and I lead the MillerKnoll Insight Group, and we're part of the MillerKnoll Research and Planning organization. In case you don't know, MillerKnoll is a family of brands, and you can see all those brands in front of you. And all these brands design and manufacture products for places where people live, where they get healed, where they learn, and where they work. And today's subject is very much about the place where we work, which of course might be anywhere. And our guest speaker today, I'm really pleased to have Kirsty, who is Development Director at Leesman. I'm going to hand over to Kirsty, who's going to tell you a little bit about herself, a little bit about Leesman, and share her thoughts on the power of place. Kirsty, over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mark, and great to be here with you all. It looks like the chat is a bit lively this afternoon, which is great to see. As Mark mentioned, I'm Kirsty Angara. I'm a development director here at Leesman. I've been here for a couple of years now. My background is actually in ergonomics and human factors. So I've known Mark and the MillerKnoll brand for many years, over a decade now, actually. And it's been a fun time, and pivoted over to Leesman a couple of years ago to share data and insights to some of the largest organizations around the world. So it's been a fun couple of years so far. So this research that we're going to share with you today is called The Power of Place, understanding what part the place plays in our employee experience and how we move from an average to an outstanding working environment and experience for our employees as well. At Leesman, we typically share these researches twice a year, sometimes a little bit more as well. Our research team, headed up by Dr. Peggy Roth, and her team jump into the data, have a lot of fun with the data, and we share this freely, usually around March and October time, and then in between we do some of these individual webinars as well. So if you haven't heard of Leesman before, we are the world's largest benchmark of employee workplace experience, over 1.3 million responses to our office survey. And I'll talk a little bit through about that in a second as well. We are a survey methodology, so that's how we collect the data. And there's a few elements to that survey. It's a self-reporting survey by employees. First of all, we try and understand what activities are important to employees and how well they feel supported in those activities, whether that's in the office or at home. That then gets added to the corporate key outcomes. We have 11 workplace impact statements, and they're really linked to business outcomes. So things like knowledge sharing, community, environmental sustainability, well-being. That specific question is actually answered by every single individual who responds to the survey. So as a business, you get a real sense of that culture in your business and what's working well and what might need some improvements too. And that's what gives us a Leesman LMI score for the office and a Leesman H LMI score for the home. That's on a scale of 0 to 100. The closer to 100, the better the employee experience. And then we overlay that with a group of features, so over 50 features, understanding from an employee's perspective what features are important to them and in their roles, and how supported or how satisfied are they with those features as well. So you get a really robust level of data when you're going through this survey, and when we report back on it to share those insights to drive employee experience in a more positive way and inform those future workplace strategies as well. So as I mentioned, over 1.3 million responses to our office survey and over 500,000 responses to our home survey. So we have this really unique position to compare and contrast the office and home experience and sort of everything in between as well. Historically, we really only looked at office pre-pandemic, but as a catalyst of the pandemic, we developed our home survey, and that's where we come to today with all of this data. The research that I'm going to share today, which is Power of Place, forms a sort of trilogy of research over the last couple of years. So we started back in 2022 with Purposeful Presence, how and why employees return. It's one of our most downloaded reports, actually. It's a fantastic piece of research from our team and really just helps us as organizations to understand what that return to office looks like and why people are returning to the workplace. We then brought out the workplace reset and trying to understand more a new minimum viable office. What's that sort of baseline level of employee experience that we should be offering our people? And now we bring you Power of Place, which is really informing the difference between average and outstanding workplaces, and not just informing that through our data that we've collected, but helping you understand how you can move from an average space to an outstanding space as well. So definitely go and check out the other piece of research, because they really do form this overall sentiment around employee experience as well. Now, just to give you a bit of background in terms of hybrid working at the moment, and then I'll jump into the research a little bit more here. So you can see here there are 4 years, so 2020 to 2023. In 2020, if we look at this sort of blue checkered mark here, 22% of people were working in a hybrid way. And we deem hybrid working as office working and some home working as well. So in 2020, 22% of people were working in that hybrid way. And that's progressively increased. And as you see now in 2023, 79% of people are working in a hybrid way, and pretty similar to 2024 now as well. 86% of respondents in our database over the past couple of years are working in a hybrid way and continue to do so. And we also looked at our hybrid future research. So the hybrid future is a piece of research we've been running. So it's a campaign that gets sent out to employees every 6 weeks, trying to understand the effects of and the impacts of hybrid working on society, not just looking at the office and our home experience, but how is that all impacting us from a commute, our city centres, our towns that we live in as well, and everything in between. And through that research, we've understood that 91% of people really enjoy working in a hybrid way. And that differs from company to company and individual to individual as well. So there's no real sort of silver bullet to hybrid working. It really depends on the type of culture you have and the type of business that you're in as well. Part of this hybrid working information, we have delved into home working, of course, and this sort of these bespoke environments that we're creating here. And as you can see, we've been looking at the types of environments people are designing at home or have at home. And over the last few years, we've really started to see this environment of people creating bespoke environments, really investing in their home spaces. So if I look at, for example, 2020 over here, 40% of people were working from a dedicated workroom or office back in 2020, and maybe even just before that, pre-pandemic as well. But that's slowly increased, and we're now in 2023 seeing 58% of people working from a dedicated workroom or office. Now, why that's important for us to understand and know is that if we've been able to create this incredible environment at home where the noise levels are covered, we've got a great chair, desk, monitor setup, we have the kitchen nearby with the food that we want. If we have that bespoke environment at home, it's a little bit more challenging to draw those employees back to the workplace if at home you're really set up well. And even if you don't have a workroom or office that's bespoke to you at home, people who have a dedicated work area also benefiting from that type of space. So 31% of people working from a dedicated work area, perhaps not a separate room, but certainly an area that they've deemed a work environment. And then the last 11% working from non-specific locations like bedrooms, dining rooms, that sort of thing as well. So we're really seeing this home working environment elevate the experience for employees. Oh, I seem to have missed a couple of slides there for some reason. In any case, what the data is showing us here is that the average home supports the average knowledge worker better than the average office. And you'll see that in a second with some of our data here. So across 305,000 respondents between Q3 2021 and Q2 2023, we identified sort of areas of hybrid working and how we might want to navigate that. So of those 300,000 respondents, 86% of them were working in a hybrid way. But interestingly, 14% did not. And of those 14%, 5% have never worked in a hybrid way. And then 9% are always working actually in the office here. So you then have this sort of middle section of people who are working across 1 or 2 days, 2 or 3 days, or 3 or 4 days, and some people also across the whole week and 5 days. As you can see in the middle here, 24% of people are working between 2 and 3 days in the office, with the rest of their time either at home, at other workplaces, other areas such as co-working spaces as well. So That seems to be sort of a natural cadence for people at the minute. But as I say, it really does depend on the type of organization, what mandates you have in place, and individual work activities and habits as well. Now, I've mentioned home working to this point quite a lot and the benefits of home working, or the support that employees get from working from home. That might seem sort of a negative sentiment to the office, but actually what we're seeing in the data, there's a lot of good news happening around the workplace world at the minute. We're certainly on the right track. Workplaces are getting better and better year on and year out. And I think we're just building much more clarity around the types of workplaces we want to create and how people want to work as well when we are thinking about this hybrid way of working. So pre-pandemic, our Leesman index score was 64.3. If you remember, I mentioned our scoring system is on a scale of 0 to 100. So the closer to 100, the better the employee experience. So pre-pandemic, 64.3. Post-pandemic, 67.9. So just over 3 points difference there, which is fantastic. And it's great to see that positive trajectory in that employee experience. The home experience still is higher, so about 10 points higher than our office experience. So the HLMI, or what we call home LMI at Leesman, is currently sitting at 77.8, which is where we're seeing the home experience offering a slightly better support for our employees than the office. And very specifically to certain activities as well. Not every activity is better supported at home. There are definitely activities that are much, much better supported in the office. And that's part of the research that I'll be sharing with you today in terms of that power of place. Part of what we do here is obviously looking at the data and scoring workplaces. And one of the scoring mechanisms we have is something called Leesman Plus. And this recognizes workplaces that have scored an LMI of 70 or above and are providing that best possible employee workplace experience. Now, across 9,000 workplaces that we might have surveyed over the last few years, typically around sort of 50 to 60 of those workplaces are certified year in, year out. So there's not that many in the grand scheme of things, but what we're really seeing is that increase in Leesman Plus workplaces year on year, which is great to see. You know, from a purposeful perspective, we want to see as many workplaces offering that outstanding experience across the world. Now, I'll show you some images here of some of those Leesman Plus workplaces around the world. This is ICA in Sweden with an LMI of 70.8. They have a really fantastic space here. It's very open, lots of natural light, as you can see in this space here. Lots of variety of spaces around the office too, so that people can have those intimate workplace chats, collaborate, or go back and do some focused work as well. And you've got the Commonwealth Bank in Australia with an LMI of 79.1. They have this huge atrium in the middle of the office here where they host town hall meetings. And then on the periphery of that sort of atrium area, they've got the office workplaces, desk chairs, meeting rooms, and that sort of thing. So it's a really fantastic space and really has a lot of engagement in it as you walk around. It's a really great atmosphere when you walk around this space. You then have the national highways, which scored a really, really impressive 80.3 LMI. Really fantastic. I think a lot of public sector workplaces are striving to be like private organizations, because a lot of private organizations obviously have the money. But as you can see here, public organizations are doing really, really well. They really care about their people and offering that brilliant, outstanding experience. And that's evident here with a score of 80.3. And then lastly, Danske Bank, probably a more traditional workplace setting, meeting rooms, quiet spaces, this sort of campfire setup that you see here. This is a really popular space in Danske Bank. And scoring an LMI or Leesman index score of 83.3, again, a really outstanding space here. So that just gives you a sense of some of the workplaces that we're certifying as Leesman Plus around the world as well. It's not unique to a certain location. It really is a global certification. So in terms of the study background, what we investigated was a few hundred workplaces. We looked at those that scored 70 or below, and then we looked at those Leesman Plus outstanding workplaces, those workplaces that scored 70 or above here. And what we wanted to try and do was understand what are the differences between those average and outstanding workplaces. What are the things that you can do to move from that sort of enabler type workplace where there's a lot of time and effort needed to then draw it up to that Leesman Plus outstanding space? What are the key areas that you could take from this research to implement those reasonably well over the next few months or few years as well? So we asked two questions of that research. Why do you need an outstanding workplace in a hybrid working world? And how do you get one? And 4 key advantages came up in terms of this research. So we'll dive into each individual area here with some data. So over the next 30 minutes or so, I will be sharing a lot of data, but as Mark mentioned earlier, we will be sharing the slides and the research report with you. So don't fear if you can't capture all of the data or write all of your notes down. We will be sharing this with you afterwards, but hopefully I'll be able to bring some context to some of this too. So pride and image, privacy and concentration, community and working together, and that enjoyable place to work as well. And why it should be important to you as organizations and people leading this charge in workplace strategy and that future of workplaces for these reasons, really. Looking at talent attraction and retention, productivity and well-being. I think at the moment, well-being has never been talked about really much more than it is at the moment, which is amazing to see. And we've really captured some elements of well-being that can drive you from an average to an outstanding workplace at the minute. We have various modules that you can attach to the core survey, and the wellbeing module is one of them, which we designed with the International Wellbuilding Institute as well. And that is a benchmarkable module too, so there's lots of information in that to garner. Knowledge sharing as well, learning from others. How can we innovate in terms of these workplaces and bringing people together and collaborating? And then this higher return to office. If you've created this really enjoyable place to work, naturally we hope that more and more people will leave their home offices and their bespoke spaces to come into that workplace and be with each other as well, and really build on that sentiment when they're on that journey home and commuting home. If it has been a wonderfully enjoyable day, you're probably going to want to come back and reflect on that in a more positive way than negatively. So if I focus now on pride and image as the first advantage to an outstanding workplace in a hybrid working world, you can see here, so this is one of the impact statements that we survey. My workplace is a place I'm proud to bring visitors to. There's a 29 percentage points difference between those average, or what we call enabler workplaces, and outstanding Leesman Plus workplaces. So quite a significant gap between average and outstanding here. Similarly with that, the positive impact on a corporate image, again, 25 percentage points difference between average workplace and Leesman Plus workplaces here. So an agreement of 60% if you're working in an average space, that benchmark space that we have, and an 85% agreement score for outstanding workplaces for my workplace has a positive impact on corporate image. And if we look at sort of an activity as an example, so hosting visitors, clients, and customers, again, a 71% support agreement score here for average workplaces and an 88% support score for Leesman Plus outstanding workplaces. So again, quite large gaps here in terms of those different styles of workplaces. This is a list of some of the features. They're not all of them. We have over 50 that we survey, but what you can see here are the top 7 that have the largest gaps between average and outstanding. So the green diamonds that you see here are the average satisfaction workplaces, and then the blue dots, Leesman Plus workplaces here. So a lot of them actually do have gaps to them, but these top 7 were really significant when we were looking through this research, and I'll talk about one of these features specifically. But if you wanted to get your biggest bang for buck in terms of designing a workplace that moves you away from just that bog standard average workplace to an outstanding space that you're really proud to showcase, these would be the 7 features that would be the ones to really focus on. And one of them specifically, which I'll talk through closer to the end of this research report here, is really, really significant across all of those 4 advantages here. So if we think about atriums and communal areas as one of those features here, Boston Consulting Group scored an LMI of 79.3 recently here. This is a wonderful space that it's, really atmospheric. You come into the reception desk and there's a cafe close by. So you're feeling this buzz around people having a coffee together, catching up, collaborating. So whilst you're, waiting for your host to come and collect you, it's a really fun space to be, and it really has that energy about it. So That's one of the areas that we've looked at here. And when we sort of had a look at some correlations, what we understood was the more satisfied individuals were with atriums and communal areas in their workplaces, the higher the agreement scores were for pride in that workplace. So the higher the satisfaction, if you're looking at this sort of top quadrant here, or this correlation line here, this top quadrant shows that the higher the satisfaction in atriums and communal areas, the higher that agreement score when it comes to pride in the workplace. So really important feature here to get right. Then you're looking at Standard Chartered Bank. This is Taiwan. They scored an LMI of 79.0. Thinking about general decor here. So if you've ever been in a Standard Chartered Bank office, you'll know that the first thing they talk about is the artwork and the general decor. Artwork is really important to them, and they have all of these stories around every piece has been diligently chosen. There's a real story behind all of it, and that shows in terms of how proud employees feel at SCB about the general decor and just the pride of the organization around that as well. So that's a really important feature, again, when it comes to this element of pride. And when we looked at these correlations again, the higher the satisfaction to general decor, the higher the agreement score was to pride as well here. So you can see this positive trajectory moving upwards here, and then you get to this sort of top quadrant of satisfaction in terms of these scores with pride and general decor. So that was pride. We're now going to look at privacy and concentration, a really key area of workplace. I think we've historically thought about workplace post-pandemic as this collaboration hub, but what we found is that privacy and concentration is still a very key element of that, and actually really the foundation of collaborative work. So if we're looking here, my workplace enables me to work productively. There's a 15 percentage points difference between that enabler workplace and an outstanding workplace here. So marked differences when it comes to productivity. At Leesman, we do look at two senses of productivity. So we look at individual me and then collective we productivity. And we're not looking at it from a sort of input-output metric. We're very much understanding it from a, do your people, when they're in that workplace or at home, does the space enable them to be productive, or do they have that sentiment around productivity? This is a list of the 21 work activities here. So on the left-hand side, you're looking at 21 work activities that we typically do on a day-to-day basis. The green diamonds are the enabler workplaces, the blue dots, the Leesman Plus outstanding workplaces here. And you'll see that across all 21 work activities, the Leesman Plus outstanding workplaces have a marked increase in those scores for all 21 work activities. And particularly for those that perhaps require a bit more acoustic and visual privacy potentially. So things like private conversations, business confidential discussions, thinking and creative thinking, and relaxing and taking a break. Now, relaxing and taking a break is an interesting one. When we looked at the workplace reset research, we understood that actually there are 17 features that need to be rightly set up in the organization and in those workplaces for people to have a positive sentiment to relaxing and taking a break. So if that is an important activity for you as a business, it is a bit more challenging to get right, but when you do, it really yields some benefits to people's well-being and just that sentiment of feeling like they can take a breath and take a moment when they're in that office experience here. But as you can see, over 17% gap between these top 5 work activities that we're seeing here. And then if I overlay this with home data, this purple box here on the right-hand side, you can see that the gap between average workplace and home is quite significant. But as we move through these blue dots here and outstanding workplaces, this gap between the two is much smaller. And so that's a positive for the workplace industry. Workplaces are definitely getting better, and we're starting to bridge that gap between that home and office experience here as well. So really important to note, yes, the home experience offers real benefits of support for employees, but if you create this outstanding workplace with the features that we've described already, then you start to bridge that gap and start to hopefully, bring people back to the office a little bit more for specific activities as well. Now, we often get asked at Leesman about workplace density. So when we are certifying Leesman Plus workplaces, it is a question we ask of organizations to help us understand, is there this silver bullet, this perfect meter square per workstation? I would have loved to have told you the perfect answer today, but unfortunately, there isn't really a right answer. Again, it just depends on your culture, the mandates available to you, the space available to you, and the types of activities that your employees are expected to do when they are in the office. Because as you can see here, if I go to the far right-hand side, so perhaps 25 meters squared per workstation, there's an agreement score to productivity of over 95%, with quite a large, meter square per workstation here. But actually equally so, when I go then to perhaps 10 meters square per workstation, there's an agreement score of a productivity agreement score of 91, 92% here. So that we haven't really found much correlation when it comes to productivity and that workplace density. We have, though, a little bit more when it comes to noise levels. So the more satisfied people are with noise levels, the higher the agreement scores are for productivity. So you can see just this white line across all of the blue workplaces, should I say, that we've certified here as Leesman Plus. This white line having a positive trajectory up here for noise levels. Noise levels is a very interesting feature and a really important topic of conversation when we're working with organizations and sort of implementing areas for the workplace. So noise levels is important, and the reason I say that is it's one of the hardest things to get right in workplaces, and we can see that in our data. So 32% satisfaction with noise levels in average workplaces. So over 2/3 of people are not satisfied with the noise levels in your offices. Now that does increase. So in outstanding Leesman Plus workplaces, that does increase up to 45% satisfaction score. But still over 50% of people not happy with their noise levels in the space. And that can be due to varying reasons. It can be due to maybe a lack of meeting rooms, a lack of quiet spaces. Perhaps the open plan space is too big and there's too much noise going on there. Perhaps it's just the general layout of the space as well. So there are really varying degrees at which noise levels isn't highly satisfied in workplaces. But what I can say is, when you are in a Leesman Plus workplace, you'll notice that they do a much better job of creating these quiet rooms for working alone or in pairs. So this is an image from the Government Property Agency in Birmingham. They scored an overall LMI score of 76.0 here in their Birmingham office, and actually a 63% satisfaction score for quiet rooms for working alone or in pairs. And we see that much more. So if you are working in an outstanding workplace, there is a 21 percentage points gap between average and outstanding here. So, yes, noise levels are not the easiest things to get right in the workplace, but when you start to really implement solutions like quiet rooms or small meeting rooms or just focused areas, we do see a much more positive sentiment around that as well. So those are the first two advantages. I'll move over to community and working together, and then we'll get an enjoyable place to work as well before I open up for some questions. I can see the chat being quite lively at the moment, so I'm intrigued to see what conversation's been happening at the moment. Sort of this third element then is third advantage of community. So this is the impact statement. My workplace contributes to a sense of community. Again, a 19 percentage points difference between average workplace and outstanding workplace. And then when we look at some certain activities here, so informal, unplanned meetings, there's a 72% support score for average workplaces versus an 87% support score for Leesman Plus workplaces here. So again, quite significant gaps in those different workplaces. And similarly for collaborating on creative work. So we do know in our research data and our benchmark that collaborating on focused work happens slightly better at home, whereas collaborating on creative work is better supported in the office. I think from a focused work perspective, we're just better at using video conferencing tools. We've got better as individuals of being behind our screen and collaborating in that nature, sort of 1 to 2 person collaborations or maybe just team collaborations at home, particularly if you are working for an international team and you're located in various time zones as well. But definitely the office better supports that collaborating on creative work. Now, if we think about some of the features with regards to this topic area, tea, coffee and refreshment facilities is one of the higher scoring ones. This is Edge Technologies in Amsterdam, and if you've not been to this space, I'd really urge you to go and take a look and get a tour around it. They scored an LMI of 87.9. It's an absolutely wonderful place, and one of the reasons is because tea, coffee, and refreshment facilities are not hidden at the back of the space. They are prime centered. As you walk up the stairs, it's in the middle of the space. So when you are getting a beverage, you have the ability to bump into colleagues and have those sort of ad hoc chats and conversations with people. And at Edge, you can see they've scored 100% for tea, coffee, and refreshment facilities here. So it's a really important feature. And we've also noticed anecdotally that if you place the IT help desk next to refreshment facilities, that sentiment also goes up for the IT help desk too. There's just this real sense of community. If you've got a problem with your technology, drop it off at the IT help desk, go and grab a drink, a cup of tea, a coffee, and catch up with some colleagues in that waiting period. It's just a much better environment to work in here. And we've also noticed this from a correlation perspective too. So the more satisfied people are with tea, coffee, and refreshment facilities, the higher the agreement to a sense of community at work. And similarly for accessibility of colleagues, there's nothing worse when you've left your nice home, bespoke environment, commuted to the office, got up a bit earlier, spent your money on the trains, and you can't find your colleagues, you can't find your team or the people you need to speak to on that day. So accessibility of colleagues has been an important feature here, from moving you from an average to an outstanding workplace. You can see there's a 15 percentage points difference between average and Leesman Plus workplaces. And I mentioned this earlier, this is Boston Consulting Group here. They scored 79.3 and actually an 80% satisfaction score for accessibility of colleagues. So they're doing things really, really well. So if you want to find out more, I'm sure they'd be open to some further conversations there. And then lastly, an enjoyable place to work. So, you know, of course, we want to create the best possible environments that offer high well-being, productivity, the sense of collaboration, learning from each other. But ultimately, if you're not having fun in that workplace environment, then is it worth it? And so creating an enjoyable environment to work in has been a key advantage in this hybrid working world of moving you from an outstanding to an average to an outstanding workplace. So here, a 61% agreement for enabler workplaces and then 82% agreement score for Leesman Plus workplaces. So again, quite significant gaps there in the scoring. Relaxing and taking a break, I mentioned earlier, is quite a challenging feature quite a challenging activity to get right. And it requires approximately 15 features to be highly positively in terms of that sentiment. So yeah, relaxing and taking a break is an important one here. And if it's important to you, I would urge you to take a look at the workplace reset research, because we have this amazing matrix that will help you understand which features are important to driving a more positive sentiment to relaxing and taking a break. Plants and greenery obviously being a huge part of that overall sentiment of well-being as well. 31 percentage points gap between average and Leesman Plus outstanding workplaces here. I think plants and greenery often can be one of those features that gets put to the side when budget restraints come into place. But actually what we've seen here, it's a really, really important feature for employees to feel that sense of pride, feel that enjoyment when they're walking through the space as well. So a really important feature. And we can see that when we're correlating that back to that impact statement. So the higher the satisfaction score to plants and greenery, the higher the agreement score to my workplace is an enjoyable environment to work in. So you can see this nice trajectory, positive trajectory here, coming up to this top quadrant on the far right-hand corner. So the more satisfied you are with plants and greenery, the higher the satisfaction then to it being an enjoyable environment to work in. And similarly for informal work areas and breakout zones as well here, this is Standard Chartered Bank in Taiwan. Sort of very early on in the pandemic, I think one of the assumptions made here was that SCB's workplace was going to be a collaboration hub. So employees were going to come here and have these whiteboard scenarios, lots of meetings, big whiteboards, lots of pens, and sort of innovation happening in terms of that collaborative meeting. But actually, through the Leesman data that they collected annually over the last 7 years or so, what they found was that people wanted to come in to do their focused work, and certainly some meetings, but really focused work, getting on those video calls. And then the other side of that working activity was actually just catching up in these informal breakout areas, coffee catch-ups, just collaborating with your teams in this more informal breakout zone. So that was a real shift in terms of the way they were designing spaces, and that's really yielded a positive result here, an 80% satisfaction score for informal work areas and breakout zones, and a 24 percentage points gap between average and outstanding workplaces. And similarly to what you saw earlier, there is this real positive correlation here. So the higher the satisfaction scores for informal work areas and breakout zones, the higher the agreement scores for my workplace is an enjoyable environment to work in as well. So again, a really important feature if you want to move from that average to outstanding space. So I've talked here about the 4 advantages of hybrid working and moving from an average to an outstanding workplace. They're really key in terms of that attraction of talent, creating that space where people want to return to the office when they're reflecting back on their commute. Is it a place I want to come back to and invite colleagues to come with me? Can I focus in those environments? Can I innovate and share knowledge with my colleagues? Those are all really important, and you've seen that now through the data here. But there was one feature that actually was super important and significant when we looked at this research, and that was the power of variety. Now, the power of variety came up significant across all 4 of those advantages. So, and the way we looked at this, we looked at our assigned and unassigned work settings data here. So pre-pandemic, those work setting strategies were much, I guess 50-50. There was some were assigned, some were unassigned, and that yielded a 55% flexibility in those work setting strategies. Post-pandemic, that has increased up to 69%, so 69% flexibility in those work setting strategies here. Now, it's not as easy as just saying all desks are flexible, open them up to all your employees. That would definitely be too easy. Yes, open up your work setting strategy to be more flexible, but then you have to create variety so that employees, when they're choosing activities that they want to do next, they have an area in your workplace to come to and do that activity really successfully. So this power of variety is really, really important. 28 percentage points difference between average and outstanding here. So 40% satisfaction for the enabler average workplaces and 68% satisfaction for Leesman Plus outstanding workplaces. Now I'll run through this reasonably quickly here, so don't be too worried. You'll get the report after here. But when we looked at these correlations between a variety of different types of workspaces and that satisfaction score, and then correlating that to pride, for example, this top quadrant here, really high scoring. Similarly, again, the higher the satisfaction rate, the higher the agreement to productivity. Same with sense of community at work, and then also enjoyable environment to work in as well. So for all 4 key advantages of moving from average to outstanding in this hybrid working world, variety came up as really significant in terms of those satisfaction scores here. So if you want to do anything today and tomorrow, then creating a variety of spaces in your workplace is probably your best bet at the moment. Now, with all of this data that I've shared with you today and this research from our team, you might be wondering, spending all of this money, this resource, all of this effort and time to move you from average to outstanding, is that worth it? And is it going to bring my people back to the office? I won't share it here just through time constraints, but we did have a look at a case study within our research. We looked at one organization and identified a handful of their workplaces here. And I guess the simple answer to this question is, it might, but it also might not. What we feel at Leesman here is that no matter how many days your time you're spending in the office, it should just be a fantastic experience when you are there, because hopefully that will just drive more positive sentiment around the workplace and really help for your people to be more productive, enable them to be able to learn from each other, innovate, and have just a much more enjoyable environment to work in. So it might not bring people back to the office as readily as you're expecting, but they will have the most amazing experience when they do get there, which I think is the most important thing we can garner from this. And so I'll bring you very briefly now, the last minute or so, to the final conclusions here of what I've described. So as I say, attendance rates and metrics are really important, and we certainly would urge you to continue looking at those sort of measurements of success, but we do also feel that employee experience should be your focus too, not only attendance rates, because that only gives you part of the story. 4 key advantages that are vital in working in a hybrid working world here. So pride in image, privacy and concentration, community and working together, and offering that enjoyable place to work. And then 7 key features that are crucial in achieving those advantages, with variety of different types of workspaces being the key one here. But noting atriums and communal areas, general decor, quiet rooms for working alone or in pairs, tea, coffee, plants and greenery, and then breakout zones and informal work areas as well. And as I mentioned just quickly there, obviously we can't guarantee that people are going to come back to the office and return back to your workplaces if you do spend all of this time, energy and effort creating an outstanding space. But hopefully they'll have a long-lasting effect of enjoyment and pride when they are in those space, and it will offer them a fantastic experience and create a much better space for them. So that's what we believe is most important here. And I guess if you think the cost of creating an outstanding workplace is high, which absolutely it is, we'd urge you to then think about the cost of not creating one, because that might have, downward trends and negative connotations to it as well. So really creating these outstanding workplaces, we feel, is the next best step in the future of workplace here. Now I'll stop there. I'm just going to share this QR code where you can download the report. So you can just scan it with your phones and download it straight from the website. We'll also share some of these links to you after this webinar too, but I'll stop talking there and open up for some Q&A as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone. Sorry, I'm just sort of typing and capturing the questions because they disappear so quickly. That is fantastic. Thank you very much, Kirsty, and just to remind you, you will get the follow-up later. Got a ton of questions, some of which might be outside your remit or scope. And thank you everyone for the great chat that was going on there. It's just great to see that going on.
I was getting worried there, Mark. I did see a lot of questions coming through. I thought we
There
could
were
be here a while.
A lot of it was debate and observations, and my friend Craig has done his usual job of stirring the pot, which is what we always need. So thank you, Craig, for doing that. And I will share the chat with you after the event, Kirsty, because I think you will love it. So Brian asked the question, how do you define hybrid? Which is probably everyone's asking that. Is there a way that Leesman has defined hybrid in any way?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I know there are a few sort of definitions out there. We're defining hybrid working as working part of your time in the office and working part of your time from home. Although we do also have data that we deem as hybrid, which is working in the office and not at home. So that could be third spaces, co-working spaces, or other buildings, that sort of thing as well. But for the purposes of this research, working between the office and home.
Yeah, and that's the trouble. Everyone has their own interpretation of it as well. Yeah. So, and everyone tries to get rid of the term, but I'm afraid it's here to stay. So, Joseph, thank you very much for all your input. How many companies or organizations are supplying or funding the furniture and FF&E for dedicated home workstations? Have you ever covered that with any of your clients in conversations, whether they're providing home furniture?
In terms of the organizations themselves?
Yes.
Yep. So, yeah, definitely. There's varying strategies with this. So some organizations will give their employees a budget, maybe £300 to £500, and they can go and spend that money however they wish to. There are other organizations that have much stricter rules in that they will procure that furniture for employees and sort of rent it to the employees, or sort of send it back to your homes and use it in that way. So it does depend on what's going on. Still today, some organizations don't offer home working support either when it comes to furniture. So I should say that too. It's not perfect even today in 2024.
Great, thank you. And if you want to find out a little bit more about the research around working from home, my colleague Jem Mackle is sharing some great research next month. So I put a link in the chat box where you might be able to find a little bit more about that. Another question from working from home, do you have any data on where those people who are working from home, where they're working in their home, sofa, bed, chair, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so the graph very early on describes that in some element. It doesn't get into specifics of whether it's a bedroom or a dining room or an office shed, but we look at three elements. So does someone work from a dedicated workroom or office? And yeah, that could be a bespoke office, separate room. It could be your spare bedroom has become the office. We still would deem that as that room. Then you have a dedicated work area. That could be a corner of a space, a corner of your dining room, a corner of the kitchen, something like that. And then the third element is a non-specific location. That could be a dining room table or definitely your bed as well. So we don't go into specific detail, but hopefully that gives you enough information across those three elements.
Great, thank you. I'm just trying to go through the questions that are from much earlier. Do you have any data as to, the benefit of either having flexible or structured or mandated hybrid at all? I guess it's mandated versus flexibility. Have you had discussions with that with your clients as well?
Yeah, we have those discussions all the time. It's often why organizations are coming to Leesman to collect this type of data so that they can understand the employee sentiment around this, and should they be putting mandates in place or should they be more open and be flexible? I mentioned Standard Chartered earlier. They were very quick off the bat to offer flexibility very quickly, and they built strong clarity around that, which for them is working really, really well. But we have some organizations that do mandate people coming back to the workplace, maybe not 5 days a week, but certainly a proportion of your week is mandated. And for them, that does work. I think the key here is to build clarity with your employees. And so that you as an employee can have the autonomy then to make a choice of whether you stay in that organization or want to move on next as well. But yeah, we do look at that with many organizations.
Thank you. And June, I hope that the great presentation from Kirsty has answered your question about what will encourage people back into the workplace. So a great question, and I was waiting for that to be answered, and it was beautifully. Thank you. Katie asked, for the home data Leesman LMI scores, when was this taken? Was it 2020? Was it 2024? When was that data taken?
Yep, so we started we developed the home survey in 2021, but this data was from Q3 2021 to Q3 2022, I think. Or it might be a 2 years after that, actually. I think it was early 2022 to the end of 2023. I'll have to look back at that slide. I can't quite remember there.
So it's kind of pandemic and then post-pandemic.
Pandemic and post-pandemic, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. Renato asked the question that often is asked, do you have information by regions? Because he feels that there is distinct differences in regions and countries. I know in Latin America, traffic jams and technology impacts some of the data and the numbers.
We definitely do. So we have lots of regional data. We didn't really look at it so much, I guess, in this Power of Place research here. Some of it perhaps, but not significantly, because it's quite a unique thing to investigate. I think generally from a workplace perspective, though, we don't see inherently huge gaps in terms of that sentiment across the world. But we absolutely know in the Americas at the moment, maybe much more of a driving culture, long distance driving to workplace as well, having to park up. Whereas in the UK, we're probably using overground trains a little bit more too. Yes, driving as well. So the mode of transport we can look at. So we have a module called the employee commuting module, and that can be attached to the core survey to understand satisfaction rates with commute, the mode of transport, the distance, the time spent traveling as well. And we can use some of that data to report back on Scope 3 carbon emissions reporting as well. So that's quite an important area and has become much bigger in conversation over the last few months as well.
Yeah, and Sophie asked, the LMI data points are actually global. They're a summary of global data. Is that right?
Exactly. So yeah, over 1.3 office responses globally. So that's across the Americas, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia Pac as well.
Great. Thank you. Sean asked a question, and I think I missed this. Was the home index worse after the pandemic as the LMI index? Was it worse after the pandemic, or did it get better after the pandemic?
In terms of the office or the home, sorry?
The home index, the home LMI index.
The home index has increased since the pandemic. So home has had a positive trajectory the whole time. I think because people have just spent more money, they've invested in their garden sheds or their spare bedrooms at home. So that has had a more positive sort of sentiment in terms of that scoring there. But as I said, the average workplace has a larger gap to home, but the outstanding workplace, those Leesman plus workplaces, is starting to bridge that gap between office and home at the moment.
Great, thank you. Brent asked some excellent examples of wonderful design. I'm curious, as I suspect designs are perishable, is there research indicating how many months or years over which that satisfaction changes and then a design needs to be dramatically updated? And Michelle makes the point that is it the change in the environment that scores better, or is it some meaningful other difference that persists over time?
I think what it is, it's probably our expectations increase year on year. So I don't know if we've looked at that data at Leesman or that research at Leesman, but we can definitely see. So when we work with organizations that work with us from an annual perspective, they might survey 20, 30 buildings annually. Those buildings that haven't had improvement that year, let's say in terms of the design or improvement in the features, might see either a stagnation of their Leesman score or even sometimes a drop in that Leesman score as well, because our expectations year on year are increasing. So it's probably an expectation thing, coupled with maybe the design is being perished a little bit as well.
Great, thank you. I'm going to make this the last questions, give people, make sure they can get on to their next meeting. This is from Adley. Have you looked at the correlation between LMI scores and business success, basically business results and performance and even retention?
So we don't look at it sort of globally. I don't have sort of general data to share with you, but we do from an organization to organization perspective sometimes ingest their own data and compare that to Leesman data. So we have something called our return on experience reporting, which helps us to understand your Leesman scores across your cost of the buildings and the workplaces and the occupancy of those buildings as well, which gives us just this return on experience scoring system to maybe help you navigate some of those questions and strategies there. But other than that, not so much, but we do with individual organizations, not from a really general perspective at the moment.
Great. Thank you everyone for joining us and all your input. And I'm sorry I couldn't get to all your questions, but I want to say a big thank you to Kirsty for her time and an excellent presentation and insights. Thank you very much, Kirsty.
No problem at all. And thank you everybody for listening. Hope to see you all soon. Take care.